it's Miss Gabby. Today we're going to paint this beautiful sunset painting using our acrylic paints. I'm so excited about it. So a couple of things you need. I painted on an 11 by 14 canvas. You can use whatever canvas you have around or a canvas board. So whatever size you have should work fine for this painting. These are the colors that I used: white, red, yellow, black, and blue. And then for your brushes, you really just need a flat brush and a pointy brush, and that should be able to get you through the painting. So don't forget paper towels, cup of water, maybe something to cover your table with, and let's get painting. First thing you're going to see, just a minute of me doing this painting super quickly, and then we're going to get into the step-by-step. We're going to jump right in and learn how to do this painting. First thing I'm going to do is take white and yellow, mix it together off to the side to make a light yellow, and we're going to make our horizon line. So you can imagine that your canvas is in 3 parts, and I'm going to use the edge of my brush to make that horizon line. So once you have your line right where you want it, we're going to take that same color yellow and add about 1 inch sitting right on top of our horizon line. Now I'm going to go ahead and make some pink. I'm going to take white, red, and I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it. This is going to make our pink a little bit more peachy. It'll make it look better for a sunset. From here, I'm going to do a line just maybe 2 inches up from my yellow section. And then from here, I'm going to fill in this space, starting at that first pink line that I made and then working it down into the yellow strip. Now, it's easier to blend when you don't have too much paint on your brush. So I do recommend wiping your brush off on the paper towel and then going over that transition point a couple times until you get a nice smooth blend. You don't want to stop in the middle of the canvas. You want to do long strokes all the way across so that you get a really pretty soft sunset. You shouldn't be able to see where one color ends and another one begins. It should just be a soft transition from yellow to pink. Now we're going to make a sky blue color. I'm going to take a big scoop of white, add a little bit of blue, and I want to be careful on this transition between the pink and the blue because we did add a little bit of yellow to our pink. That means we're not going to get a really great purple. It's going to be like a little bit of a funky purple. So that's why I'm going to take my white paint here, add just a little bit of white on my brush, and that's going to help me soften up this transition because we still want it to be a soft blend. We don't want any harsh lines, but I don't want that weird purple color to take over. So I'm going to just add some white in the middle, and it'll also make it look a little cloudy, which is good. So you can see here, to give my sky lots of that fun texture, I'm just jumping in with the white and smoothing out some of my sky blue. And then up in the corner, I grabbed just straight blue, and I'm going to work from the top of the canvas and bring it down into my really light sky blue. So you want to be really careful with how much paint you have on your brush. This blue color could easily take over my entire painting if I'm not careful. So you just want to wipe off your brush every once in a while, make sure you're not getting too much paint on there, and then just keep smoothing it out so that you get another nice soft transition up at the top from the dark blue to the light blue. If you feel like your colors are not wanting to blend, that probably means that your paint is drying on you. Acrylic paint dries really quickly, and both colors have to be wet in order to blend. If this happens, you might have to go back and repaint some areas in order to get that nice soft blend that we want. Now we're going to bring up little bits of pink into our blue. So you want to do this really gently. I'm just going to take my square brush, dip into the pink, and then I'm just flicking in from the sides. And you want to do the best you can to fight the urge to put them all in a line or in a pattern. Try to keep them as random as possible. Now I'm going to make purple by mixing red, white, and blue together, and I'm going to flick some of these little lines on the other side of the canvas. So you want to be really, really gentle. If it does start to stand out too much, you can always take a little tiny bit of some clean water on your brush and just kind of soften it up. So the next thing we're going to do is make our sun, and after that we're going to add some bright pink lines onto our pink area. So what I did here was take a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and just a tiny drop of white to make my pink that's a little darker than the pink that I have on my canvas. Now these are going to go after we do our sun. I didn't realize it until right about now. Or I think it's when I start doing it that I change my mind. So yeah, hold on to your hot pink for just a minute there. And all I do here is dip my finger into my light yellow mixture. If you still have that sitting around, you can use it. If you need to mix some more, that was just a scoop of white and a scoop of yellow. So I used my finger to make a little circle, maybe a little bit bigger than a quarter. And then I did, since the edges were a little funky to me, I used a brush just to round off the edges. So if it looks good with just your finger, you can leave it like that. If you feel like you need to go in with the brush and shape up the edges, you can do that. But I always recommend when you're making a sun or a moon is to start small and then let it grow. Okay, so we got our sun on there. Now we can go ahead and start adding our hot pink lines. So really, really gently, I'm just softly flicking in these lines using the edge of my brush. And yeah, you can kind of put them similar to where I put them, or you can just kind of wherever feels right for you. Just go for it. Once again, if you feel like they stand out too much, I think here I just took a little bit of water on my brush, just a tiny bit. And then I just went right over the lines to smooth them out. So I'm really happy with the way that this looks, but I just want some more clouds, maybe in between the pink and the blue. So I'm going to take my white, get some more clean white here, and I dipped my brush in the white. Now I'm wiping it off on my paint palette, so I just have a tiny bit of paint on my brush. From here, I'm really, really, really softly just kind of wisping in some white over that transition point between the pink and the blue. So I kind of want it to look like a stretchy cloud. Just like that, we're all done with the sky part of our background. Now we're going to move on to our water. So I'm going to give my brush a quick little rinse here, and then I'm going to jump into that blue paint that's right on my palette. And I'm going to start at the bottom of the canvas and work my way up. So for right now, I'm going to leave an inch blank below the horizon line. That blank strip is where light blue is going to go. So I'm going to take a little scoop of white and a big scoop of blue, mix those two together, and here I'm going to use the edge of my brush to go ahead and define my horizon line. And then I'm going to work this light blue color down into the dark blue. So we want another soft blend here. Next thing we're going to do is add the reflection of the sun on the water. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of that peachy pink, and I'm using my pointy brush here, grabbing some white, a little red, and a little yellow. Once you have that peach color again, I'm just going to really gently start to add some little lines right below the sun on the water. And I'm doing this while the blue for my water is still wet. That way it blends a little bit and looks natural. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and take my blow dryer and dry it. You can also just wait like 5 minutes if you don't have a blow dryer handy. When it's dry, I'm going to grab that same color again and add some more little lines. You'll notice these will be much more vibrant because they're not blending in with the blue behind it. Now I'm going to take my yellow and white mixture and I'm just going to add little short lines in the middle of this area. So this is like a little extra reflection coming right from the sun. We're all done with our background. It's looking pretty good. Now we're going to go ahead and add the rocks at the bottom of the canvas. So what I did was pick up my pointy brush here and I'm just making like little hills, little rocks all along the bottom of the canvas. And then I'm just going to fill that in with black paint. This is going to be the land that our palm trees are going to sit on. So I went ahead and grabbed a smaller brush. If you have a smaller brush, you're welcome to use it. If not, the one we were using before would work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and sketch out where my palm trees are going to go. I have one on the left and then there's 3 over on the right. So I'm going really lightly, holding my brush like a pencil, and I'm just doing the lines. I'm not worrying about the width just yet. Feeling pretty good about the placement of my trees, so I'm gonna go ahead and start adding that width. So trees are always chubbier on the bottom and skinnier up on top. Now palm trees are always pretty skinny, so I'm gonna keep that in mind and just add a little bit of width at a time to help widen the bottom of the palm tree and just widen the whole tree overall, because right now they're just a little too skinny. So we're almost done with these tree trunks here, and after this we're going to start on the top of our palm trees. So what I want you to do when you're ready is to put your brush right at the very top of the tree trunk, and you're going to make curved lines going out of that same point. I like to call this a firework. So from here I'm going to add the little leaves by just making little curved lines on either side, not straight, curved, and they should be going the same curve as those first firework lines that we made. I do recommend mixing a little bit of water into the black paint just from the brush. That is going to help soften up the black paint and make it feel a little bit more like ink. So you're just going to repeat that same process on all the trees, and if your leaves are like super close together, don't worry about it. We're going to add a highlight that's going to kind of break them apart. For our highlight, we're going to take some white mixed with yellow and really gently add some little accents. So we don't want to cover up our palm tree, we just want to give it a little pop of yellow. We're also going to add a little bit of our highlight color onto our tree trunks. And I also added a little bit onto the ground because it looked like it needed something. If you go a little overboard with your highlight, you can always take black paint and blend it out. And this is our final painting. Thank you so much for painting with me. I can't wait to see how your painting turned out. Remember to keep practicing and keep being creative. I'll see you next week.
Douglas was an African-American painter during the Harlem Renaissance. He is known as the father of African-American painting. Hello boys and girls, this is Miss Pia from West Sanford, and today our painting is going to take inspiration from an artist called Aaron Douglas. Aaron Douglas was a very important African American painter from the 20s of a movement called the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was around the 1920s, that's when it took place, but it began because of something called the Great Migration. The Great Migration happened sometime after the Civil War and around the time of First World War. A lot of African Americans from the South migrated up north to cities like New York or Chicago, but they came north and they left behind the lynching, the lack of work, the lack of opportunities, and they came up for a better life. A lot of them settled in a place in New York called Harlem. Harlem is in North Manhattan, and there a movement began called the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance encouraged people to take racial pride, embrace their African culture like the ancient Egyptian culture. It also was a movement that said explore your Black identity. Out of that movement, many artists came about, musicians, writers, actors, playwrights, artists, filmmakers. Out of there came a man called Aaron Douglas, and that is who we're going to be discussing today. Now, with the painting that I have done, we're going to work with tints and shades. Tints and shades is something he used a lot in his paintings, and he did a lot of murals as well. Now, when you have a tint, is a color and you add white to that color. And when you have a shade, you're going to add black to your color and make that color darker, and that makes it a shade. What we have done here is a landscape of a city. So you can make an imaginary city skyline. I've made a futuristic city, what I think is a futuristic city, or just any old city. So for this project, first we're going to be needing a medium-sized brush. We're going to need a rag. We're going to need some kind of palette. Water jars going, one for my lights and one for my darks. We will also need a pencil, and let's hope your pencil has an eraser. And for colors, we will need white and black, your tint, your shade, and the color that you'll be using. In this case, I'm using green, but you can use whatever color you would like, as long as you mix it with your black and your white so you can get your tint or your shade. Now I'm using this green because I'm doing landscape. You can use purple, you can use red, as long as it's one strong color in the center, so you can then do your tints and your shades. Okay, so now I hope that is all cleared and we can get on with our creativity. Begin holding your canvas on a horizontal. Horizontals are good for your landscape, and with your pencil you will begin to draw your first layer of your landscape. Now I'll begin on my second layer of my landscape. Notice that I will overlap some of my imaging. Later on, I'm going to take my eraser and erase the overlap, so the last line that I did, the last layer that I did, will appear as the first layer closest to you. So erase any of the lines in there, so that way it will cause less confusion later on. For your next layer, do the same process. Use your pencil, hold it very lightly. Do not put too much force on your pencil. Keep it light and draw your layer in. Draw in your next layer of your skyline. And remember, if you have any overlapping, erase those lines. You will erase the line so the last layer you did looks the closest to you. So whatever that line is, you're going to erase it. And now continue on your last layer and do the same with your eraser if you have any overlapping. Take your palette and add your white paint, about a quarter size amount, and your green paint. From now on, I'll be using the word pigment. Pigment is another word for paint, and that's the word we artists refer to instead of paint. We say pigment. You are going to then mix your color until you get the right tint that you're looking for, not too light. If you need to add a little more, go ahead and add a little more pigment. When you feel you have gotten the right tint with your pigment, please start applying it on your paint. And the first layer you're going to do is your sky, so that will be your lightest area. Once you are ready for your next layer, take your palette and add a little more pigment of green onto your already mixed tint. You're not going to make it super dark, just make it a little darker, and again keep adding paint until you get the right consistency, that there's a difference between the paint you're doing and the paint that you just did. Once you feel you have gotten your right shade, give it a test, see if there's enough of a difference between the last layer you did and this layer you're doing. If not, you can always add a little bit more until you get the right mixture of pigment. When you are ready for the next layer, take your brush and rinse it out of your pigment. Take your rag and clean out any excess water, and then apply your brush to the green pigment and keep doing your layer. When you have finished doing your layer with the green, we are ready to start doing our shades. So we will be adding the black pigment into our green pigment and make a shade. Just add a little bit of black. Make sure you get a separation between the last layer and this layer. When you get the right consistency, begin coloring in your layer. After you have finished that layer, go back to the mix you have done, that's your shade, and add a little more black and make that green a little darker, and make sure you have a right amount of black in your green so there's a little separation between the last layer you did and the one you were doing. Once you get the right consistency, begin doing your layer. After you have done that layer, you're ready to do just your black. Only your black paint on the last layer and complete that section.
Hello there, I am Miss Alana. I am from the Universal Branch of the Boys and Girls Club of Central Florida, and for today's lesson we are going to learn about a group of African American artists called the Highwaymen. We're going to get our materials together, learn about who the Highwaymen are, and then create a landscape painting much like this one together. So let's get started. So first of all, here is our list of materials for today. We're going to use a couple of different shades of acrylic paint. We need some paint brushes. You can either paint on a piece of paint paper or a canvas, and your water cup. So while we get our materials together, we're going to learn a little bit about who the Highwaymen are. The Highwaymen are a group of 26 African American self-taught artists that started in the 1950s and became popular in the 60s and 70s for capturing natural Florida beauty with their iconic landscape paintings. Out of the 26 artists, all were men except for one woman. The Highwaymen were self-taught artist entrepreneurs who mentored each other to pass down their business practices and quick-style landscape painting techniques that gave them the ability to paint a full landscape in an hour or less. The Highwaymen used easily accessible materials such as oils and Epsom board, which is like a drywall. They painted Florida landscapes in a variety of themes such as beaches, night scenes, sunsets, swamps, and poinciana trees. The Highwaymen were shunned by local art galleries because of prejudice and segregation, so they sold paintings themselves out of the trunks of their cars, thus giving the traveling artists the name Highwaymen. They usually charged between $25 to $35 per painting to businesses and Florida locals. This gave the ability for the average person to own affordable and quality artwork that captured daily scenes in Florida. The ability to create crowd-pleasing, high-quality art quickly, sell it at an affordable price, and be their own traveling bosses gave the Highwaymen economic independence, the ability to chase their artistic dreams, and to break out of the mold of segregation that had been imposed on them. Some of the Highwaymen have since passed away, but they remain an important story of African American perseverance and creativity. For today's project, we are going to use this painting by Highwayman Alfred Hare as our inspiration. Alfred Hare was one of the founding members of the Highwaymen art group. His painting style, along with his natural businessman charisma, was the blueprint for many highwaymen, and that's why we will be learning from his example today. So, just a review before we get started, there are 3 parts of a landscape painting. That is the foreground, the part closest to you, the horizon line, which is in the middle, and then the background. Now that we've had the time to learn about the highwaymen and gather our materials, let's get started with our painting. Alright, so we have all of our materials together and now we are ready to start with our painting. We learned the 3 parts of a landscape, which starts with our horizon line. So that's what we're going to start with first. Since the first color in our gradation from our horizon line going up is that purple, that's what we're going to start with. Now you want to grab some kind of like straight edge brush, kind of like this, so we can make a nice line with it. Just get some of your purple on there, and then our horizon line is going to be a little bit lower than the actual middle of our paper. So my middle is about here, but I'm going to drop it down a little bit to about 1/3. So dropping your horizon line down a little bit kind of just makes it more interesting. If it was directly in half, it'd kind of be perfectly in half, you know. Sometimes when things are a little bit off-centered, it can be a little bit more interesting. So I have about this much space down here, and I can always go and add more at my foreground if I think I did it too low in the future. So now we are just going to fill in this area down here with our purple. Making sure I have water on my brush as I paint. And I'm going all the way to the edge of my paper. So this is about it for this color. Now we're going to start going into the next one, which was going to be our red. So we have all of our colors in order, so then we know which order they go in, right? So now I'm going to do my kind of red orangey color. I'm not going to blend it yet. I'm just going to go right above that line from the other one. Just kind of figure out how big this section I want it to be. So I want it to go about there. So I'm going to fill in all of this area now with this red. Alright, so I have my red on there now. So what I'm going to do next, while both colors are still wet, I am going to grab some of the lighter color, which is our purple, and I'm going to start to go over it in that dividing line that we established before. So I'm just going back and forth with my brush, kind of going over the red, letting the red and the purple mix together. It's just a lot of back and forth, back and forth. You want to get your colors to blend as much as possible. If you want to get a little bit of the red and put that further in, you can. You also want to make sure your brush is wet. That's going to help these colors blend in with each other because they are wet. Dry colors do not like to mix together, really. And then just keep going back and forth, switching between each color until you get kind of a blend that you are happy with. Alright, so that is good enough for me. We can still see where our purple is, we can still see where the red is, but now they're kind of blending in together very nicely right there. So our next step is going to be our next color on our color wheel palette, which is the kind of orangey yellow color. So we're going to do the exact same thing we just did with the red. So here's my section of orange. It's going to go up until there. And now I will fill in this area, go all the way to my edges. And then while it's still wet, we can start the blend. So our red is still a little bit wet from our last color, so that's great. If it did dry out a little bit for you, always just go back in, dab a little, and then blend together. Just back and forth until you get a blend and a color of that kind of red-orange that you are satisfied with. So that's good for me. Now we can start going on to our last color up here, which is the yellow. So I just cleaned off my brush. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it, grab some of this yellow, and then fill in this whole area. And you can see my paper is starting to curl a little bit. I've added a lot of water to it. It's fine if it curls, you just don't want to add so much that your paper is going to start ripping. Which is why you can do this project on a canvas if you'd like. So I have my yellow, same thing as before, just going to start to blend that orange into it. You can always grab some more if your color is running out. And just kind of a nice blend of the colors. The yellow is going to fade away within this orange. And we're just going to be left with it at the top. So now we have this lovely gradation of colors, and then we can start working on our bottom half. All right, so now we're going to start working on our bottom half of our painting. We started off with our horizon line and we did our background. Now we are going to start working on the foreground, and we have our palette turned to our foreground colors. So we're going to do the opposite of what we did up here. We went from our darkest color to our lightest color. This time we're going to do our lightest color to our darkest color. So my lightest is this green, and this purple is pretty much dry for me. So I am going to go right next to that horizon line. And I'm going to fill that in with the green that I'm using. At this time, if you wanted to change the height of your horizon line, you can do that to make it higher or lower. And then I'm just going to fill in a little bit of this front area with this green color. So it's mostly going to be the darker green, but I'm going to establish this area first. Then I'm going to swap to my next color, which is this darker green. Doing the same technique as with the sky to make a gradation down here as well. So this darker color is now going to blend into my lighter color. Very lightly, just going back and forth while the paint is wet to get our colors to blend. And then I'm going to grab my last color over here, which is this dark green, and I'm just going to fill in the rest of it with this green. Get all the way to your edges and then start to blend them together. Back and forth, blending your colors. If you kind of wanted to make the rest of this a little bit darker, just go back up with your darker color and blend all of them together. Big, wide strokes make it blend easier than small little ones, because now you're covering the entire surface. Make sure you get all the way to your edge. And then if you want to make this front part even darker, you can take a tiny little bit of black. We're going to do it right along this edge down here. And then we're just going to blend it in. Same thing, but not quite as far. You can see since everything is still wet, it blends really well. That's one thing with acrylics, is you do have some time to work with your colors, but you also kind of have to work a little bit fast because everything dries in a convenient amount of time. So make it as dark as you want in the front. If you want your black to go higher in your background, of course you can do that. So I am satisfied with that now. We have our foreground gradient done, we have our background gradient done, and now we can start going back to our horizon line and start working on our trees. So now we are done with our background and our foreground. We're going to go back to our horizon line and we are going to switch our brush. So I've been using this flathead brush and now I am going to switch to this more rounded brush. And we're going to start working on our trees on this horizon line. So I'm going to go back in with my darker green now, just starting with the dark colors. And I'm going to go in and create these trees right along this line. So the way to make trees, they're kind of just like blobs. Since they're so far away in our background, we can't completely tell that they're trees. What we're trying to go for is that kind of fluffy, bushy-like shape that they take when they're really far away. So you can start on one side, the corner, the middle, wherever you want. What I'm going to do is start over here, and I'm just going to kind of dab my brush down up to that horizon line. And that's going to be a tree. Very easy, right? Very simple. You can kind of think of the shape of a cloud as you do it. So that one's kind of short and fluffy. You can make some taller ones. And all I'm doing is getting some paint on my brush, and then I'm just kind of lightly dabbing, going up and down, making different shapes as I go across my paper, following that horizon line. I'm just going in and filling in the rest of this area by doing that really light tapping on my paper to create these fluffy trees in the background. Do a couple different sizes of them and just follow across your horizon line and fill your entire area until you are satisfied with your trees on your horizon line. So that was our first color. We're going to go back in while this paint is still wet, and we are going to add just a tiny little bit of the black. So we're now going to dab on top of that and kind of blend these two colors in with each other. We don't want them to completely cover either one. We just want them to blend with each other, just like we did with our gradient. So I'm going in now, I'm doing the exact same thing I just did on each one of these background tree areas, making sure all my colors blend in with each other, but that the tree doesn't turn completely black, it's just kind of a darker green now. And as I'm doing this, my paint is starting to dry a little bit both on my paper and on my brush. So I'm just kind of dabbing it where these fluffy parts of my brush is starting to stick out, and that's called dry brushing. So it kind of makes our trees look a little bit more realistic. So now I am going to start from our horizon line, and I'm going to start making that larger tree that we saw in our picture. And if you're kind of hesitating on just doing this straight on your paper, you can grab a pencil. You can kind of draw the outlined branches of your tree if you want. Otherwise, just jump in with me and we're going to go for it, okay? So I'm starting with my black, just a little bit lightly black on this pointed brush. And then I'm going to start kind of from my center down here. Keep a somewhat steady hand. And then go about there. My tree is going to be about that high. So I have the base of my tree now. Just going to outline it, make it a little bit darker. And then we can start making some branches. So branches are really easy. They're going to be mostly covered up by these kind of fluffy leaf parts that we're going to do on this too. So you really don't have to worry too much about them. You're just going to start at a point. We're going to start down here actually. I'm just going to kind of make a squiggle that goes down and has another one come off. And that's it for our branch. Like I said, most of that is going to be covered up, so you don't have to think it out too much. The one thing to keep in mind is that we're going to start larger on the bottom and then get kind of smaller on the top, kind of like a pine tree does. So I have my longest branches out here. Now I'm just going to get a little bit smaller as I go up. So I'm continuing to make more branches on my tree. They're getting smaller as I move up. They're really just these funky squiggles with a couple little extra lines coming off of them, kind of like V's on the end. And just add as many as you like until you get a shape that you are satisfied with. Alright, so now I am grabbing that round-headed brush that I used before. I'm going to grab some of my darker green and I'm going to do the same exact thing as with our background trees. So I'm going to pick a point, going to dab a bunch of paint on top of it, do it in sections, not just the entire thing. Each one of these branches is a section, right? So each section is going to be filled in, kind of leave some space in the middle so we can see the inside of the tree. And then you can let some of the paint dry off of your brush and we can get that dry brush effect again happening and make these trees look really fluffy and really full. So I'm just doing that all over. And then that is it for that part. So now I am actually going to wash off my brush and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to grab a little tiny bit of that black and kind of work the black and the green within each other while they're both still wet. So again, I'm just using that same technique that we did before. I'm lightly tapping the black into the green to let our colors mix together and using that dry brush to make it nice and fluffy. Using these techniques over and over is a fast way to get our colors to blend. And then now here is where we create our moss. So we gotta work kind of fast. We want to make sure all of this is still wet. I have a little bit of black on my brush. What I'm going to do is start at a section and just bring it down. Kind of very lightly make these things kind of colors kind of blend in with each other and start to fall down. If you have too much on your brush, just wipe it off a little and lightly just kind of bring those colors to start to blend downwards. So if you've ever been in Florida, if you're from Florida like me, you see that all these trees here have a lot of this moss coming off of it. It's called Spanish moss. It lives here because we have a lot of humidity in our air and the moss loves that humidity. So that's why you probably see these big gray fuzzy stuff hanging off of trees all the time here in Florida. So kind of adding just these long strokes of our paint to this drawing gives it that really like Florida feel that the Highwaymen captured within their own paintings. If you want to add a little bit extra black to yours, make it darker in little areas, you can do that. Pretty much just work on it until you are satisfied with your moss hanging down. So now that I've washed off my brush, I am going to grab the little one yet again, and now it is time to use that lightest color of green again. We haven't used that in a while, right? So we saw with our drawing, so I'm going to use this lighter color right here with my smaller brush, and we're going to go back to our horizon line. We saw with our painting by Highwayman Alfred Hare that there's kind of like a bit of water right here on our horizon line, not so much in the middle. So I'm just going to take this light color and kind of go over this horizon line a little bit. I'm going to do short, small little strokes with this color to kind of make it look like there's water right there. So now I'm just following along my horizon line, doing these short little dabs of paint with that lighter green color I have. It's just going to add a little bit of like a highlight and a detail to this horizon line that we're working with. And then I'm also going to go back in with the darker green and do the same thing. So it's just going to kind of blend things together. It's going to make it more look like it's water or grass rather than that like perfectly smooth area that we did before. So we're going to add one more round of bushes or trees, but these ones are going to be actual bushes. So this tree is much larger because it's closer to us. It's within our foreground. So now we're just going to add a couple of kind of bushes, trees that are a little bit closer to us down here. So it is going to start to overlap some of these ones that we did down there. But that's fine. We're going to start with our lighter color. And this time we're not going to stop at that horizon line. We're going to stop a little bit lower. So it's going to go up a little. I'm going to add one more smaller one right there. And just dab with these colors. It's going to kind of cover that background a little bit, but it's going to kind of establish that this tree is closer to us. It's not on that line in the background like we started off with. And again, you grab your darker black, and while everything is still wet, you dab, 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 blend your colors together, and make those darker trees. So now we have like two tree layers going on with each other. Kind of makes things more interesting. It kind of establishes our foreground and our background being two different things from each other. And you just add as much black as you would like for your own painting. So the Highwaymen always added a little bit of their own personal flair of Florida to their own paintings. So at this time you can do that for yourself. For this, I'm going to add a couple of little birds. They're just going to be over here on the side. It's kind of like making a V, but very wide, like that. So I'm just adding these little birds on the side, and then I am done with my painting. Alright, so now that we've let our painting dry, we are done with our project for today. So let's take a moment and look back at the example painting by Alfred Hare that we saw earlier in our video. We can see we have all of the main elements that was in his, the foreground, the background, and then the large Spanish moss tree in the center. So overall, we created a lovely Florida landscape painting using the fast techniques that the Highwaymen used, and we put our own style within it as well. So thank you for joining me here today to learn about the Highwaymen, and I will see you next time. Bye!